Paradise Revealed. Volume 1. From Eden to Enlightenment through Milton's epic Paradise Lost. Introduction. 2 epics, 1 universal struggle. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. Bhagavad-gītā 9:2. Dear seeker of wisdom, in the quiet hours of contemplation, when I first opened my heart to John Milton's Paradise Lost, something profound stirred within me. Here was a work of breathtaking beauty, a sacred journey into humanity's deepest spiritual longings. As the verses washed over me, I felt their power to illuminate the eternal questions that dwell in every searching soul. Milton's characters, God in his divine majesty, Satan in his tragic fall, Adam and Eve in their innocent love and fateful choice, spoke directly to the spiritual pilgrim in me, the yoga and meditation teacher raised in the embrace of Vedic wisdom. Yet as I dwelt in Milton's garden of verse, my heart whispered of another truth, one that had been my constant companion, the divine song of the Bhagavad-gītā. This book, Paradise Revealed, From Eden to Enlightenment through Milton's epic, flows from that sacred recognition. It is both a bridge and a beacon, illuminating how the eternal wisdom of the Bhagavad-gītā can guide us through Milton's masterwork toward what his own soul sought, to justify the ways of God to men. As we walk this path together, we'll discover how these 2 spiritual treasures, one born in the West, one carried from the East, mirror the same divine truth, that the journey of the soul knows no boundaries of faith or time. Milton's divine vision. For those yet to walk through Milton's garden, Paradise Lost tells the story of the first step away from divine love and the promise of return. It opens not in Eden but in the depths of spiritual darkness, where Satan, having turned from divine light, falls into the abyss of his own making. From these shadows we rise to witness the miracle of creation and the pristine beauty of Eden, where Adam and Eve dwell in innocent communion with the divine. Their story of choice, temptation, and apparent loss is our story. Yet Milton leaves us not in darkness but points us toward an inner paradise happier far than any earthly garden. The eternal song of the Gita. Like a mother's loving guidance to her child, the Bhagavad-gītā offers its wisdom through the divine conversation between Lord Krishna and his beloved devotee Arjuna. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Krishna reveals the eternal nature of the soul, the sweet secret of divine love, and the paths that lead us home to God. The Gita's wisdom illuminates the very questions that echo through Milton's verses. How do we choose love when fear clouds our vision? What is our true nature beyond these temporary bodies? How can we find lasting peace in a world of change? Through what the Gita calls pure knowledge, truth realized in the heart, not merely understood by the mind, we begin to see our way back to the paradise that has never truly left us. A light for your journey. My own path through these sacred texts has been blessed by the loving guidance of my father, whose lifetime of devotion to Vedic wisdom has helped me see the divine light that shines through all sincere spiritual seeking. Our conversations about Milton's epic, viewed through the crystal-clear lens of the Gita's teachings, revealed how truth calls to truth across the centuries. This book is not meant to exalt one tradition above another but to show how divine wisdom, like the sun, can shine through many windows to illuminate one room. The Gita teaches us to receive spiritual knowledge through the chain of loving devotees who have preserved and shared it through time. With this humble approach, we can discover new beauty in Milton's verses and universal truths about our eternal relationship with the divine. An invitation to all hearts. Whether you are a scholar seeking deeper understanding or a seeker looking for spiritual nourishment, this book opens its arms to you. If Eastern wisdom is your old friend or a new acquaintance, the Gita's loving insights will help you find fresh inspiration in Milton's sacred poetry. As we explore these teachings together, this marriage of Western vision and Eastern wisdom, may we draw closer to what Milton himself sought, the awakening of our divine nature, the remembrance of our true identity, and the blossoming of our eternal love for the divine. With prayers for your journey. Shivani Diwan. Chapter 1: The Supreme Controller and the Illusion of Equality. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. Bhagavad-gītā 4:1. My journey into Paradise Lost often felt like attempting a complex yoga pose without proper guidance, perhaps something like the challenging scorpion pose where balance and focus are everything. I could perceive the intricate movements of Milton's verse, the powerful expressions of cosmic drama, and the sheer epic scale that spans heaven, hell, and earth. Yet the fundamental philosophy, the profound why behind the rebellion, the fall, and the divine order, sometimes eluded me, leaving me tangled in confusion. It was during our initial family discussions about the book's overarching purpose that my attention was irresistibly drawn to the very genesis of Milton's narrative, the dramatic opening scenes of rebellion in heaven. This was no mere literary tale. It was a cosmic battle of wills, an ultimate clash between unquestionable authority and defiant ambition, resonating deeply with the foundational principles of ancient wisdom traditions. My father, with his profound grasp of the Bhagavad-gītā and years of spiritual study, became my indispensable guide. Through patient conversations over tea in our quiet home, he helped me discern the universal spiritual truths woven into Milton's majestic verse, bridging the gap between 17th-century English poetry and timeless Eastern philosophy. This chapter will establish the absolute authority and supremacy of God, as depicted in both Milton's epic and the Gita. We'll contrast this divine order with Satan's audacious rebellion and his deeply flawed desire for false equality, a theme that echoes in today's world, where ideas of personal empowerment and equality often blur the lines between healthy ambition and destructive ego. Integral to this understanding is the concept of disciplic succession, which the Gita presents as the authorized means of receiving and comprehending transcendental knowledge. This framework provides an illuminating lens through which to grasp the profound distinction between genuine spiritual freedom, rooted in harmonizing with the divine will, and the perilous illusion of independent sovereignty that ensnared Satan and continues to entangle conditioned souls in cycles of suffering and rebirth. Milton's invocation and Satan's audacious defiance. Milton wastes no time plunging the reader into the heart of his epic. Following his invocation to the Muse, where he seeks inspiration to assert eternal providence, and justify the ways of God to men, he immediately introduces the boundless expanse of God's domain and his eternal providence. Yet almost instantaneously our attention is seized by the magnificent yet terrifying figure of Satan. Once clothed with transcendent brightness in the happy realms of light, he is now utterly fallen, rallying his bewildered and defeated legions within the fiery confines of hell, a place of darkness visible and eternal torment. What immediately strikes the reader is Satan's unyielding pride, a quality that makes him both captivating and cautionary. Despite his catastrophic defeat and banishment from heaven's glory, his spirit remains unbroken, consumed by a defiant resolve that borders on heroic tragedy. He declares with arresting conviction, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." This singular line speaks volumes to a deep-seated, albeit often misguided, human desire for independence and absolute sovereignty, even if such a pursuit leads to a desolate and self-imposed kingdom, much like modern figures who chase power at the expense of harmony, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships. Satan's bold discourse to his assembled, confused legions in hell vividly portrays a fundamental challenge to the established celestial hierarchy. He views God's rule not as a benevolent order designed for the greater good, but as an oppressive monarchy over beings who are, by their very nature, his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal. He insinuates that God reigns merely by old repute, consent or custom, and his regal state put forth at full, but still his strength concealed. This rhetoric cleverly twists the narrative, suggesting that divine authority was unchallenged only because it was untested, much like how in today's society long-standing institutions are questioned in the name of progress or equality. This is a profound misrepresentation, implying that God's authority is not inherent or absolute, but rather a product of tradition or an unspoken agreement, whose true power remained hidden until overtly challenged. Satan vehemently refuses to submit necks and choose to bend the supple knee, portraying his rebellion not as an act of malevolence but as a righteous struggle for what he perceives as inherent freedom and equality. He rallies his troops with assurances that their strength is equal, contending that their expulsion from heaven was a consequence of brute force, not a just, divine law rooted in cosmic order. This bold discourse further reveals Satan's profound self-delusion, a trap that many fall into when ego overrides wisdom. He is convinced that he and his cohorts can reascend, self-raised, and repossess their native seat. His aspiration transcends mere liberty, reaching for honor, dominion, glory, and renown. Even in the abysmal depths of hell, his height of mind persists, nourishing the conviction that he remains supreme, albeit only supreme in misery. Such joy ambition finds. It's a poignant reminder of how unchecked ambition can lead to self-inflicted isolation, similar to entrepreneurs or leaders who build empires only to find themselves alone in their hells of burnout and regret. I remember the bewilderment I felt discussing these passages with my father during one of our evening walks. "Dad," I asked, "how can a being as powerful and intelligent as Satan make such a fundamental error?" His arguments for freedom and equality resonate with so many human values. Think of civil rights movements or the push for gender equality today. My father, listening patiently as we strolled under the stars, would simply smile. He recognized that my questions touched upon the very core of spiritual understanding. To truly appreciate Milton's narrative, he would begin, we must first establish unequivocally the nature of ultimate authority. Our tradition, particularly the Gita, leaves no room for ambiguity on this fundamental point. Let's sit down with the text and see. The absolute authority of the Supreme Divine. My father opened his well-worn copy of the Gita, a book marked with notes from decades of reflection, and directed my attention to the chapter's guiding verse. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. This verse, my father explained, is far more than a mere historical account. It is a profound declaration regarding the origin of all authority and knowledge. It sets the foundational stage for understanding the true identity of the divine, and by extension, the absolute nature of God. In the Gita, the Supreme is unequivocally declared as the ultimate divine personality, not some abstract force but a personal being with whom we can have a relationship. The divine as inherently complete. The Supreme's designation, my father continued, is not a title earned through conquest or election, nor one that rests on old repute, consent, or custom as Satan audaciously claims of Milton's God. No, the divine is supreme because of inherently possessing all perfections in full, complete strength, fame, wealth, knowledge, beauty, and renunciation. These are inherent, eternal attributes, not acquired ones that can be challenged or duplicated. This understanding is critical because it differentiates the true divine from any other powerful being or deity, whether in mythology or modern interpretations. While the term supreme is sometimes mistakenly applied to any influential figure, think of historical emperors or today's tech moguls, in the context of the Gita, it explicitly designates the ultimate divine personality. This truth is confirmed by all the great spiritual masters throughout history, from ancient sages to contemporary teachers. The divine consistently establishes this supreme position in the Gita, and this is further corroborated in sacred texts throughout the world, including echoes in Abrahamic traditions like the Bible's declarations of God's sovereignty. Origin of all and supreme controller. My father emphasized, the divine is the original supreme personality, the absolute truth, the source of both the individual soul and the impersonal absolute. The Supreme is the ultimate controller and the origin of everything. There is nothing greater than or equal to the divine, no peer, no rival. To illustrate this, the Gita explains the absolute truth in 3 phases of understanding: the impersonal aspect, the localized aspect, and the personal aspect. While all 3 are identical aspects of the absolute truth, the personal feature represents the most complete and perfect knowledge, inviting a devotional relationship rather than mere intellectual grasp. The divine is not only the origin of all living entities but also the origin of all material and spiritual worlds. The text states, "I am the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire." The Supreme is described as the great-grandfather, the creator of the cosmic creator, who is himself considered the grandfather of the universe. This lineage clearly establishes the divine as the ultimate source of all existence, a concept that parallels Milton's God as the author and end of all things. God's transcendental nature. It's like this, my father continued, seeing my contemplative look as I pondered the implications. We don't argue with the sun about its right to shine, or with gravity about its power to hold us to the earth. These are inherent laws of nature, but even these laws emanate from the Supreme. To claim freedom equal to God for a living entity is as illogical as a wave claiming equality with the ocean, or a branch asserting independence from the tree's root. The branch's very existence, its sap, its leaves, are all dependent on the root. Without the root, it withers and dies. Imagine a yogi trying to defy gravity in meditation. It's not about rebellion, but alignment. Furthermore, the divine is described as all-perfect, and crucially, there is no possibility of becoming subjected to the laws of material nature. All material activities are conducted under the three modes of material nature, modes that influence everything from our moods to our actions. Yet the Supreme is not subject to them, even though they emanate from the divine. This transcendental position means that the divine is completely free from the influence of these modes, unlike conditioned souls who are constantly bewildered by them, swinging between joy and sorrow like pendulums in a storm. The constitutional position of the living entity. The very foundation of understanding the cosmic order and our place within it lies in grasping our constitutional position relative to the Supreme, a realization that can transform daily life, from yoga practice to interpersonal relationships. Eternal fragment of the Supreme. The living entities, my father would explain during our deeper sessions, are not randomly generated beings. They are eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme. Qualitatively, we are one with the divine, possessing consciousness, eternity, and bliss, but quantitatively, we are infinitesimally small. Just as the sunshine is qualitatively similar to the sun, warm, illuminating, yet vastly smaller and dependent, so too are we minute spiritual sparks of the Supreme, deriving our essence from the Source. This eternal relationship between the individual soul and the Supreme Divine is clearly articulated in sacred texts across traditions. The Supreme is accepted as the origin of all emanations, and living entities belong to the superior energy, while matter constitutes inferior energy. Although the energy and the energetic are non-different in an ultimate sense, like heat and fire, the energetic is always the supreme and the energy is subordinate. This relationship is akin to that of master and servant or teacher and taught, fostering growth rather than oppression. The illusion of independent existence. While endowed with minute independence, a gift that allows free will, the living entity often misuses this freedom. In material existence, my father explained, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because of the mind's ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. This domineering mentality, which compels living entities to try to lord it over material nature, is precisely what keeps them conditioned within the material realm, reincarnating through cycles of birth and death. Satan's grandiose declarations of aspiring for honor, dominion, glory, and renown, and his belief in being lord of everything, even in hell, perfectly exemplify this false ego. He embodies the conditioned soul's tragic misconception of self-sufficiency and supreme control, much like a CEO who believes their empire is eternal, only to face collapse. I recalled Abdil from Paradise Lost, the lone seraph who courageously stood against Satan's blasphemous claims amid the gathering storm of rebellion. Abdil argued that serving God is not servitude, but rather an alignment with one's natural constitutional position. Unjustly thou depravest it with the name of servitude, to serve whom God ordains, or nature. God and nature bid the same when he who rules is worthiest and excels them whom he governs. Abdil even sagaciously tells Satan, thyself not free but to thyself enthralled, highlighting the irony of rebellion leading to greater bondage. This perfectly echoed my father's explanations. Abdil, in his unwavering loyalty, was in harmony with his true identity, while Satan, striving for an illusory independence, became tragically enslaved by his own immense pride and corrosive envy. The living entity, trapped in material consciousness, appears to be its master but is neither its proprietor nor controller of its actions and reactions. This state is likened to being in the midst of the material ocean, struggling for existence, tossed by waves with no control, waves of desire, anger, and illusion. The only true solution is to get out of the water by transcendental spiritual consciousness, a process that begins with humility and devotion. The purity of knowledge. Understanding these profound truths about God's supremacy and our constitutional position is not a matter of intellectual conjecture or personal opinion. It requires access to pure, unadulterated knowledge transmitted through an authorized channel, lest we fall into the same traps as Satan. Divine teaching through disciplic succession. How does one come to understand this profound truth? My father would ask rhetorically during our talks. How do we, as finite beings with limited senses, comprehend the infinite, especially when faced with so many conflicting ideas and interpretations in books, online forums, or even spiritual retreats? He would then point again to the verse we began with. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. This is where the concept of disciplic succession becomes absolutely critical, he emphasized. This verse reveals the ancient history of the Gita's teachings, tracing it from the divine to the sun god, who then instructed Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn taught his son, a king of the royal order. This imperishable science was especially meant for the royal order, for saintly kings, because they were entrusted with protecting their citizens from material bondage by imparting spiritual knowledge, much like ethical leaders today who guide societies toward higher values. The Gita explicitly states, this supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it appears to be lost. My father explained that this breakage in the succession system is why the original purpose of the Gita became scattered across misinterpreted versions. This means that genuine knowledge about the Supreme and our eternal relationship must be received from an authorized source, not concocted through our own mental speculation or clever arguments that prioritize ego over truth. Purpose of pure teaching. Milton's epic aims to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men, I recalled during one discussion, but how can one truly justify God's ways without truly knowing the divine or understanding the supreme nature? Exactly, my father affirmed. This is precisely why the purity of the message is paramount. Authentic spiritual teaching specifically emphasizes presenting divine wisdom as it is without adulteration, because many interpretations were introduced to fulfill someone's personal ambition. He warned that mundane speculators like politicians, philosophers, or scientists often have very little knowledge of divine truth and try to banish or diminish the divine when writing commentary. Such commentaries are deemed useless because they divert the reader's mind from what is clearly stated, that all devotional service should be offered to the Supreme Divine, not scattered among lesser goals. The spirit of the Gita, as my father always stressed, must be understood as directed by the Supreme. It is not to be interpreted whimsically but accepted as it is, just as one would follow the directions on a medicine label given by a physician. Deviating could be fatal. To inject personal opinions or speculative philosophies is to distort the very essence of the divine message, leading to confusion rather than clarity. The danger of unauthorized commentary. Such unauthorized commentary, my father explained with a note of caution, leads to bewilderment. Great spiritual masters have explicitly warned us about these interpretations. Anyone who endeavors to understand the Gita from an impersonal point of view, treating the divine as a formless energy without personality, will commit a great blunder. The result of such a blunder will be that the misguided student will certainly be bewildered on the path of spiritual guidance and will not be able to go back to the spiritual realm. This warning underscores the danger of impersonalism, which denies the personal feature of the divine. The Supreme is absolute, and there is no difference between the divine name, form, qualities, and activities. They are all eternal and blissful. Impersonalists, however, often try to separate the divine personality from mind or body, which is sheer ignorance. Such approaches fail to grasp that the divine form is a symbol of complete knowledge and bliss, and the Supreme is the proprietor of everything, not an abstract void. Those who are envious of the divine have no authentic access to the great literature. Even highly scholarly individuals, if they are envious or prideful, produce commentaries that are useless because they criticize without truly knowing the truth. much like critics who dissect a masterpiece without appreciating its soul. The honey bottle analogy. To further illustrate the critical importance of proper understanding and devotion, my father often cited a vivid analogy from the spiritual tradition. Those who approach the teachings without being devotees, especially those envious of the divine, have no authentic access to this great literature. They are like bees licking on a bottle of honey. They cannot taste the true mysticism because they have not opened the bottle. They buzz around the surface, missing the sweetness inside. This means that external scholarship, intellectual prowess, or even a superficial engagement with the text, such as reading it for academic credit or casual interest, without the internal attitude of devotion and submission to the Supreme, will remain fruitless in unlocking the true spiritual essence. Only by approaching the teachings with the right mood, humility, sincerity, and through the right channel like a trusted guru or succession line, can one truly perceive and benefit from the divine wisdom, transforming abstract knowledge into lived experience. Satan's rebellion as a manifestation of ignorance. When viewed through the lens of the Gita's teachings on divine authority and the purity of knowledge, Satan's rebellion in Paradise Lost takes on profound spiritual significance. Ceases to be merely a narrative of a powerful angel's defiance and becomes a universal allegory for the devastating consequences of spiritual ignorance, pride, and the rejection of the divine order, a warning relevant to anyone chasing illusions of power today. Rejection of authorized knowledge. Satan's arguments for equal freedom and his reliance on his own counsels are in essence a rejection of authorized knowledge. He actively denies the intrinsic supreme authority of God, fabricating the notion that God's rule is founded on mere old repute, consent, or custom, rather than on the inherent position of the Supreme. This stands in stark contrast to the divine's undisputed and self-evident supremacy, as revealed through pure transmission. The Gita highlights that those who are ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They ultimately fall down because they neither believe in nor worship the Supreme Divine and consequently have no status whatsoever in spiritual emancipation. Satan in his pride exemplifies this faithlessness, refusing to accept the revealed truth of God's absolute position, much like skeptics who dismiss spiritual texts as outdated myths. The demonic spirit and false ego. Satan's character, particularly his persistence in rebellion despite utter defeat, perfectly embodies the demonic spirit described in the Gita. The demonic are characterized by their refusal to believe in the divine, instead choosing to simply enjoy the property of the Supreme without acknowledging divine proprietorship. They devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims, rather than adhering to established spiritual truths, leading to chaos. This directly parallels Satan's endless machinations in hell, where he conjures new strategies of fraud or guile after being vanquished in direct warfare. His desire to lord it over material nature and his height of mind in hell, where he believes he is supreme in misery, are classic symptoms of false ego. The Gita states that the individual soul is entangled in the material world precisely because of the mind's ego which desires to lord it over material nature. Satan's grand pronouncements of being the lord of everything, the enjoyer, perfect, powerful, and happy, believing that there is none so powerful and happy as I am, are not expressions of actual power but profound delusions arising from this false ego, delusions that mirror narcissistic leaders or influencers who project invincibility online, only to crumble inwardly. Satan as fool number 1. The Gita leaves no doubt that one who fails to understand the true nature of the divine, despite opportunities for instruction, is considered deeply ignorant. My father often referred to such individuals as representing the height of foolishness, quoting the text, "Those who do not understand the real nature of the Supreme as the eternal, blissful, all-knowing divine personality, despite clear instructions, are certainly the most foolish." Satan, with his vast intellect and original exalted position as a high angel, had every opportunity to comprehend the divine order. Yet his overwhelming pride and envy blinded him, preventing him from accepting God's supremacy. His persistent defiance, born of this spiritual ignorance, led him to devise elaborate schemes against the divine will, ultimately leading to his eternal suffering and entanglement, a fate that serves as a cautionary tale for anyone ignoring inner wisdom in pursuit of ego-driven goals. This profound misunderstanding of his own identity as a minute-dependent fragment of the Supreme and his rejection of the proper channel of knowledge ultimately condemns Satan. His demand for equality with God is not an enlightened quest for justice, but a tragic symptom of his deep spiritual ignorance and the unbridled influence of false ego. Conclusion: the path to true freedom. This exploration of paradise lost through the philosophical framework of the Gita profoundly alters one's perception of Milton's epic. Satan's bold discourse, which might initially appear as a valiant struggle for inherent freedom, perhaps even inspiring in a world that values individualism, is now revealed as a tragic testament to the destructive power of false ego when fundamentally divorced from the absolute truth. His arguments, once seemingly compelling, are exposed as being rooted in a foundational misunderstanding of his own identity and the Supreme's unassailable authority. He utterly failed to grasp that the divine is the supreme controller, the origin of everything, and that all living entities are eternally divine parts and parcels, meant for harmonious service rather than rivalry. The Gita's emphatic stress on receiving knowledge through the unadulterated succession system powerfully highlights why Satan's self-raised philosophy inevitably led him into utter darkness. He represents those who, without perfect knowledge of the divine, try to banish or diminish divine truth through their own speculative interpretations and self-serving ambitions. Path to liberation, conversely, begins with shedding this illusory sense of independent control and accepting our true constitutional position as eternal servants of the divine, a shift that can bring peace amid chaos. This chapter fundamentally underscores that true freedom lies not in asserting an illusory independence from the divine, but in harmonizing with the divine will, accepting our inherent eternal connection to the supreme controller. This understanding provides a comprehensive and profoundly satisfying justification for the ways of God. Demonstrates unequivocally that genuine peace, lasting happiness, and ultimate fulfillment are attained not through rivalry or competition with the Supreme, but through unwavering devotion and a deep, loving understanding of our eternal relationship with the Supreme Divine. This profound understanding is the very first and most crucial step toward achieving true paradise, not merely the recovery of a lost garden, but the restoration of our authentic spiritual nature and our eternal relationship with the divine. As we'll explore in the coming chapters, this foundation sets the stage for delving into the cosmic architecture, the nature of temptation, and the path to redemption. Chapter 2: The Demonic Nature and the Descent into Darkness. Those who undergo severe austerities not recommended in the scriptures, performing them out of pride and egoism, who are impelled by lust and attachment, who are foolish and who torture the material elements of the body as well as the divine spark dwelling within, are to be known as demons. Bhagavad-gītā 17:5-6. The raw power of Milton's Paradise Lost truly unfolds after the initial cosmic clash we explored in Chapter 1, where we established the ultimate authority of God and revealed the profound spiritual error inherent in Satan's rebellion. But as the narrative progresses, a more pressing question emerges: what truly defines Satan after his ignominious fall? How does he, along with his vast army of fallen angels, manage to sustain such unwavering defiance in the face of absolute defeat? This question led me to delve deeper into Satan's character in the aftermath of his expulsion, connecting his motivations, which are rooted in insatiable pride, corrosive envy, and an unquenchable desire to overcome God, with what the Gita describes as demonic nature and the three gates to hell. In a world where social media amplifies voices of defiance and self-promotion, Satan's story feels eerily relevant, serving as a cautionary tale about the seductive allure of unchecked ambition. I remember bringing my worn copy of Paradise Lost to my father one rainy afternoon, tracing the dramatic passages where Milton describes Satan enduring torment in hell. "Dad," I asked, leaning over the table as thunder rumbled outside, "even after being cast down, utterly defeated, Satan still seems so grand. He's defiant, unyielding, almost admirable in his tenacity, like those charismatic leaders who rally followers despite scandals. How does a being that once shone with such divine brightness sink into such profound despair, yet manage to maintain such a powerful, rebellious spirit?" My father, with his characteristic calm wisdom, picked up his well-worn Gita, its pages softened from years of study, and his fingers reverently traced the text before responding. "My dear," he began, his voice steady amid the storm, That grandeur you perceive is the very essence of demonic illusion. It is a deceptive, false strength, relentlessly fueled by overwhelming pride and consuming envy, ultimately leading not to glory but to endless and self-imposed suffering. The Gita clearly defines this demonic nature and explains its characteristics, which Milton's Satan embodies with startling precision. Let's look at chapter 16. It contrasts divine and demonic qualities like light and shadow. The fall into despair. Milton's initial depiction of hell is one of absolute horror and despair, a realm antithetical to divine light and hope. It is a dungeon horrible on all sides round as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light but rather darkness visible. This infernal world is a place of regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes, utterly far removed from God and light of heaven. The fallen angels, though ethereal, are subjected to this torment. Beyond the fiery lake, some embark on bold adventure to discover wide that dismal world, exploring infernal rivers like Styx, Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, and Lethe. They endure a bitter change of fierce extremes by change more fierce, from beds of raging fire to starven ice, oscillating between burning plains and a frozen continent lies dark and wild. This is truly a universe of death, which God by curse created evil, for evil only good, where all life dies, death lives. Satan, despite his suffering, clings to the delusion that the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. This statement reflects profound spiritual ignorance, as he attempts to assert his sovereignty even over his internal experience, denying the external reality of God's supreme control. His unyielding and rebellious spirit is not a sign of true strength, but the essence of demonic illusion, a mindset that echoes modern self-help mantras like mind over matter, which often ignore deeper spiritual truths. My father paused, looking out at the rain. This depiction of hell is a powerful metaphor for the material existence of conditioned souls who are deeply entangled in ignorance and under the influence of illusion, he said. The Gita teaches that the entire material world, with its perpetual cycle of birth, old age, disease, and death, is fundamentally a place of suffering. Those who are perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions will inevitably fall down into hell. This hellish situation is exacerbated by moral decay leading to widespread suffering, much like how environmental neglect or societal greed creates collective misery today. The suffering endured by Satan and his legions mirrors the predicament of conditioned souls in this material world. Like him, we are in the midst of the material ocean, struggling for existence, tossed by its waves without any real control over our circumstances. Satan, however, remains fixed in his domineering mentality, which is precisely what keeps souls conditioned. He is an example of those who, being distressed by their circumstances, they take shelter of intoxication, and thus they sink further into ignorance, intoxication not just of substances, but of power, fame, or revenge. The demonic mentality. The Gita provides a comprehensive description of demonic nature. In chapter 16, it explicitly contrasts the divine and demonic qualities, offering a clear framework for understanding beings like Satan. Our guiding verse for this chapter perfectly encapsulates Satan's plight and motivations, warning against unauthorized austerities driven by ego. Contrasting divine and demonic qualities. Text delineates 26 divine qualities that belong to godly people endowed with divine nature. These include fearlessness, a state of being free from all anxiety due to being fixed in spiritual knowledge, like a yogi in deep meditation. Purification of one's existence, a cleansing process of the mind from sinful activities through practices like mindful eating or reflection. Cultivation of knowledge, engaging in the analytical study of spiritual truth beyond mere facts to transformative wisdom. Charity, giving to the proper receiver, especially for spiritual propagation such as supporting community centers or education. Self-control, not only for ascetics but also householders who should manage their senses properly, avoiding impulsivity in daily decisions. Performance of sacrifice, not for fruitive results but for divine pleasure like offering time in service. Study of sacred texts, engaging in the study of spiritual literature to purify one's existence, perhaps in group readings. Austerity, accepting voluntary difficulties for spiritual advancement, not for mundane gain, such as fasting with intention. Simplicity, being straightforward and honest in one's dealings, free from manipulation. Nonviolence, not causing distress to any living entity either mentally, physically, or in speech, practicing empathy in conversations. Truthfulness, speaking only the truth that is palatable and beneficial, avoiding agitation like constructive feedback. Freedom from anger, cultivating calmness even in provoking situations through breathing techniques. Renunciation, giving up actions that hinder spiritual progress like letting go of toxic habits. Peacefulness, calmness of mind achieved by detaching from sense gratification, finding inner quiet amid chaos. Aversion to fault-finding, not engaging in gossip or finding faults in others, fostering positive relationships. Compassion for all living entities, understanding that all beings are parts of the divine, extending kindness to animals and strangers. Freedom from covetousness, not desiring others' possessions, content with one's own path. Gentleness, being mild and soft-hearted, approaching conflicts with care. Modesty, avoiding improper or shameful acts, maintaining humility. Steady determination, firmness and spiritual resolve, persisting through setbacks. Vigor, spiritual potency and enthusiasm, energizing daily life. Forgiveness, the ability to overlook offenses, releasing grudges. Fortitude, endurance and conviction, standing firm in beliefs. Cleanliness, both external and internal. Freedom from envy, not being malicious towards others' success. Freedom from the passion for honor, not desiring false prestige or honor, focusing on inner growth. These qualities are considered auspicious for progress on the path of liberation. Those situated in such transcendental nature advance towards freedom from material bondage, creating a ripple effect in their communities. In stark contrast, the text describes the demonic qualities characteristic of those born of demonic nature. Pride, an inflated sense of self-importance like boasting on social media. Arrogance, a haughty and disdainful attitude dismissing others' views. Conceit, excessive self-esteem leading to a disregard for others. Anger, violent passion or fury often arising from unfulfilled desires, flaring in road rage or arguments. Harshness, cruelty, roughness, or severity in behavior and speech. Ignorance, a fundamental lack of spiritual knowledge, leading to delusion and poor choices. Satan, from the moment of his rebellion, embodies these demonic qualities with chilling precision. His initial act of rebellion is fueled by immense pride and an unquenchable lust for power and glory, leading him to challenge God's supremacy. His inability to tolerate the son being anointed king, perceiving it as an impairment to his own standing, is the very hallmark of envy, a defining feature of the demonic, much like workplace rivalries that destroy teams. Envy and the inability to know truth. My father stressed, Satan is the archetype of the demonic mentality. His rebellion stems from pure envy, that poison of the soul. This envy is a fundamental barrier to understanding the supreme truth. The Gita clearly states that those who are envious of the divine as the supreme have no authentic access to the great literature. Such individuals, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of the divine. They criticize the character of the divine without knowing the truth, and their commentaries are useless because they are rooted in this envy. Satan's entire bold discourse in hell, challenging God's authority and motivating his legions, is in essence a perverse commentary on God's rule, born entirely of envy and self-aggrandizement. This renders him utterly incapable of truly perceiving God's absolute position. He is a fool, for he does not and cannot understand the real nature of the divine, as the Gita warns. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, let alone divine supremacy. False ego and attachment. The Gita profoundly explains that the living entity's entanglement in the material world stems from the mind's ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Satan, by maintaining this domineering mentality, not only damns himself but seeks to extend this delusion to others. His pride, arrogance, and conceit are direct manifestations of his false ego, the false identification that makes him identify with his temporary power and position rather than his eternal, subordinate nature. He sees himself as the Lord of everything, the enjoyer, perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man, surrounded by aristocratic relatives. There is none so powerful and happy as I am. This internal conviction, despite his external reality of being cast into hell, is a potent illustration of how false ego blinds one to actual circumstances, like influencers who project perfect lives while battling inner turmoil. The demonic are further characterized by being too strongly attached to sense enjoyment. Even in hell, Satan's ambition is not for repentance but for regaining glory and renown, albeit through fraud or guile. This fixation on material enjoyment, even in a state of suffering, exemplifies the deep-seated attachment that drives demonic behavior, similar to addictions that persist despite consequences. Illusion and self-deception. The demonic are bound by a network of illusions. This state of perpetual bewilderment is not a passive condition but an active self-deception that prevents them from seeing reality. The Gita describes the demonic as those who are perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions. Their minds are caught in unmeasurable fears and anxieties that persist unto the point of death. Satan's bold discourse in hell, where he speaks of their ability to reascend, self-raised, and repossess their native seat, is a masterpiece of manipulation and self-deception. He is not interested in genuine repentance or true change. His sole interest lies in regaining lost glory by any means necessary, even if it entails further deceit and corruption of others. This illusory hope, divorced from any real understanding of divine power, is precisely what keeps him entangled in suffering, much like gamblers who chase losses with bigger bets. The strategies of misguidance. Council in hell, convened by Satan in pandemonium, the palace risen, suddenly built out of the deep, represents a spectrum of demonic responses to defeat and offers a view of how souls deeply entrenched in illusion devise strategies based on their inherent modes of material nature. It's a scene that mirrors dysfunctional board meetings or political debates where ego trumps wisdom. Moloch, the violence of ignorance and passion. Milton's Moloch, the strongest and fiercest spirit that fought in heaven, exemplifies the mode of ignorance and passion in its most aggressive form. He advocates for open war, proposing that they immediately launch a frontal assault on heaven. His logic is simple yet brutal: turn their tortures into horrid arms against the torturer. This is a prime example of actions impelled by passion leading to present misery. The Gita explains that when the mode of passion is prominent, it manifests as great attachment, uncontrollable desire, hankering, and intense endeavor. Moloch's unbridled desire for revenge and his immediate impulse to fight, despite their overwhelming defeat, is characteristic of this mentality, like violent protests that escalate without strategy. His proposition aligns with actions not recommended in the scriptures. These are activities undertaken out of pride, false ego, lust, and attachment for material enjoyment. Moloch's aggression, born from rage and a desperate clinging to his former warrior status, perfectly fits the description of those who torture their bodily organs as well as the divine spark dwelling within through unauthorized penances, in this case by foolishly throwing themselves back into a losing battle. Belial, the deceit of false philosophy. Belial, in contrast to Moloch, represents a more subtle and insidious form of demonic evasion. Described as "than whom a spirit more lewd fell not from heaven," he argues against direct warfare, fearing even worse punishment. His counsel is one of ignoble ease and peaceful sloth, advocating for passive endurance in hell, hoping that God's anger and perhaps thus far removed not mind us, not offending, satisfied with what is punished. Belial's pleasing sorcery and false philosophy are designed to charm pain for a while or anguish, and excite fallacious hope. This type of deception resonates with the Gita's description of those who manufacture modes of austerity and penances which are not mentioned in the scriptural injunctions for some ulterior purpose. They may appear outwardly spiritual or philosophical, but their underlying motive is still self-serving sense gratification, like self-help gurus who promise easy enlightenment without real sacrifice. Mammon, the greed for material dominance. Mammon's contribution to the infernal council embodies the demonic mentality of insatiable greed and material attachment. He proposes that instead of fighting or passively enduring, they should focus on exploiting the riches of hell, digging for gold and other precious minerals to build a thriving kingdom in hell. This desire for self-reliance and material prosperity, even in a cursed realm, is a direct rejection of the supreme controller and a manifestation of greed. The Gita describes the demonic person as thinking, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer, perfect, powerful, and happy." Mammon's plan mirrors corporate greed, where profit trumps ethics, building empires on exploitation. Bewilderment of action and inaction. The Gita explicitly states that even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. This profound truth applies directly to the infernal council. Despite their formidable intellect, Satan and his associates are profoundly confused about the true nature of action. To be liberated from all sins, one must understand the distinctions between prescribed action, forbidden action, and liberated action. The demonic, by their very nature, reject spiritual injunctions and authorized knowledge. Therefore, all their carefully devised plans, whether Moloch's open war, Belial's subtle deceit, or Mammon's material accumulation, are fundamentally forbidden actions that lead to deeper entanglement and suffering, like short-term fixes that worsen long-term problems. Hell and ignorance, the reality of spiritual darkness. Milton's vivid descriptions of hell with its utter darkness and penal fire, where hope never comes, resonate with the Vedic understanding of material existence. The suffering of the fallen angels, despite their ethereal nature, is a profound metaphor for the state of conditioned souls caught in ignorance, under the pervasive influence of illusion. Milton's hell is a metaphor for material bondage. Milton paints a picture of hell as a dungeon horrible on all sides round, a place where peace and rest can never dwell. The bitter change of fierce extremes, from burning plains to frozen continents, symbolizes the perpetual misery and lack of genuine repose for those alienated from God. This depiction of hell, my father stated, his eyes reflecting the text's depth, is a powerful metaphor for the material existence of conditioned souls who are deeply entangled in ignorance and under the influence of illusion. The material world itself is explicitly described in the Gita as a temporary place of miseries. It is a realm characterized by birth, old age, disease, and death, where happiness is fleeting like a mirage. The Gita's perspective on material misery. The suffering in Milton's hell, the constant anxiety, the unfulfilled desires, the internal torment of pride and envy, is not fundamentally different from the psychological and spiritual miseries experienced by conditioned souls in the material world. Those who are perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions will inevitably fall down into hell. The absence of peace and rest in Milton's hell directly corresponds to the conditioned soul's lack of inner peace. One who is not in transcendental consciousness can have neither a controlled mind nor steady intelligence, without which there is no possibility of peace. The demonic, absorbed in unmeasurable fears and anxieties up to the very moment of death, are perpetually devoid of genuine contentment, like anxiety-driven lives in modern society, fueled by constant comparison. The three gates to hell. The Gita clearly identifies the primary forces that drive demonic nature and lead to spiritual degradation. There are three gates leading to this hell: lust, anger, and greed. Every sane man should give these up, for they lead to the degradation of the soul. Satan's motivations and actions are a perfect illustration of these three destructive vices, interconnected like a vicious cycle. Lust. Lust is identified as the greatest sinful enemy and the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. It is not merely sexual desire but any insatiable desire for material gratification, including the lust for power, fame, and control. Satan's entire rebellion stems from this pervasive lust. He desired to be equal to or greater than God, driven by an inherent desire to lord it over material nature. His hunger for honor, dominion, glory, and renown is a clear manifestation of this lust. My father explained that lust covers pure consciousness in 3 degrees, like smoke covering fire, like dust on a mirror, and like an embryo covered by the womb. Satan's inability to see God's absolute supremacy, despite having been in his presence, demonstrates how deeply his consciousness was covered by this lust for power and position, like politicians who crave control, blinding themselves to ethical boundaries. Anger. Unfulfilled lust invariably leads to anger. When desires for gratification are thwarted, the natural reaction is fury. Satan's burning rage against God and the Son, his pervasive perfidious hatred, is a direct consequence of his inability to achieve his lustful ambition of overthrowing God. Moloch's call for open war fueled by his tortures is a direct expression of this unchecked anger. This raw, destructive emotion blinds individuals to reason and leads them to commit further sinful acts, like road rage or online trolls exploding in fury. Greed. Greed is the insatiable desire to accumulate more endlessly. It drives the demonic to amass wealth by illegal means, without regard for moral or spiritual principles. Mammon's proposal to exploit the riches of hell to build a thriving kingdom perfectly illustrates this. The demonic mentality is characterized by the belief, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes." My father emphasized that these 3 vices, lust, anger, and greed, are interconnected and constitute formidable enemies to human life. They are the direct pathways to the degradation of the soul. The more a person is freed from their influence, the purer their existence becomes, allowing them to follow spiritual principles and progress spiritually, starting with small acts like mindful consumption. The artificer of fraud. Satan's transformation into the serpent to tempt Eve is a pivotal moment in Paradise Lost and a profound illustration of the demonic nature's reliance on fraud and deceit. This cunning aligns perfectly with the Gita's descriptions of how demonic individuals operate to mislead others, shifting from brute force to subtlety. Falsehood and manipulation. Satan is explicitly called the artificer of fraud and the first to practice falsehood. His strategy shifts from open warfare to close design by fraud or guile. This is evident in his temptation of Eve, where he uses a serpent tongue and fraudulent temptation. He employs ambiguous words and jealousies to corrupt integrity. My father explained, this is another key characteristic of demonic nature. Such individuals are often called miscreants who do not know the scriptural rules and have no faith, nor are they willing to act in terms of spiritual injunctions. Instead, they devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims and mislead the public and general readers from the path of divine instructions, like fake news spreaders or manipulative marketers. Satan's ability to make the worse appear the better reason reflects this deceptive power, characteristic of the demonic who manufacture modes of austerity and penances which are not mentioned in the scriptural injunctions for some ulterior purpose. These acts are often performed out of pride, false ego, lust, and attachment for material enjoyment. Disregard for scriptural injunctions. A fundamental trait of the demonic is their disregard for established spiritual injunctions. They operate outside the authorized rules and regulations, preferring their own concocted methods. The Gita warns against those who undergo severe austerities and penances not recommended in the scriptures, performing them out of pride, egoism, lust, and attachment. Satan's entire scheme to corrupt humanity is an act of forbidden action, unauthorized action, performed in complete defiance of God's clear command. He encourages Eve to disregard the divine prohibition, promising her elevated knowledge and godlike status. Ye shall be as gods. This act is the epitome of acting without following any rules and regulations, like hackers bypassing systems for personal gain. Escaping the abyss, the path beyond demonic nature. The bleak picture of demonic nature and its inevitable descent into darkness highlights the urgent need for a path to liberation. The Gita, while uncompromising in its description of the demonic, simultaneously offers a clear, compassionate, and accessible solution, the path of spiritual consciousness, a journey anyone can begin even amid modern distractions. Abandoning the 3 gates. The very first step on the path to transcendence is to recognize and actively abandon the 3 gates leading to this hell: lust, anger, and greed. These must be given up, for they lead to the degradation of the soul. This requires a conscious effort to purify one's existence, as the more a person is freed from lust, anger, and greed, the more his existence becomes pure, starting with journaling desires or mindfulness practices. Surrender to divine will. Unlike Satan, who refused to submit and choose to bend the supple knee, the path to true freedom lies in surrender to the divine. The text's ultimate instruction, described as the most confidential part of knowledge, is to simply surrender. This surrender is not a sign of weakness but of ultimate intelligence and humility. It is the understanding that the divine is the supreme controller and proprietor of everything, and that our eternal constitutional position is to be a loving servitor, like trusting a guide in a storm. Cultivating divine qualities. Counter to demonic qualities is the cultivation of divine qualities. These include fearlessness, purity, knowledge, charity, self-control, nonviolence, truthfulness, and freedom from anger and envy. These qualities are not acquired by mere intellectual understanding but by deliberate practice in spiritual consciousness, integrated into daily routines. Cleanliness. This involves both external purity and internal purity. Internal cleansing is achieved by thinking of the divine always and chanting holy names. This chanting process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind, like a mental detox. Self-control. This means not accepting anything detrimental to spiritual progress. The senses, compared to venomous serpents that want to act very loosely and without restriction, must be controlled. The most critical sense to control is the tongue, by systematically engaging it in tasting sanctified food and chanting holy names, practical for busy lives. Steadiness. One must be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. This unwavering conviction helps one avoid being disturbed or engaging in fruitive activities for promotion to heavenly planets. Wisdom and knowledge. True knowledge is not merely academic but involves understanding what is spirit and what is matter, and the distinction between the soul, the supersoul, and the material body. This is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. Spiritual consciousness as the ultimate solution. The Gita emphasizes that the highest perfection of self-realization is to understand that one is eternally the servitor of the divine, and that one's only business is to discharge one's duties in spiritual consciousness. This is the liberated stage of devotional service. Direct engagement. Spiritual consciousness is the easiest process of executing spiritual principles and the direct method for liberation. It allows one to become fully absorbed in the divine without deviation. Chanting holy names. In this present age, the best means of spiritual realization is chanting the holy name. This process is extremely effective in purging the mind of all misgivings and cleaning the accumulated dust of past karma, accessible even via apps or during commutes. Transcendental association. Progress on this path is greatly accelerated through the association of pure devotees. One has to associate with devotees, those who are in spiritual consciousness. One should search out a society dedicated to spiritual consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service, like joining online communities or local groups. Working for the divine. Even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of devotional service, one can be drawn to perfection by working for the divine. This means being sympathetic to the propagation of spiritual consciousness, helping with resources, labor, or support. All activities, when performed for divine satisfaction, become spiritual activities, like volunteering for causes aligned with compassion. Faith. Faith is crucial for advancement. It means being convinced that devotional service is the best course. Faith ranges from tentative to firm conviction based on spiritual knowledge. One who, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of karma if they have firm faith without envying the divine. Through these practices, one can overcome the demonic tendencies of pride, envy, lust, anger, and greed, replacing them with divine qualities and ultimately achieving eternal peace and liberation in spiritual consciousness. This is the profound message that my father continually shared, illuminating Milton's tragic epic with the timeless wisdom of the Gita, a wisdom that can transform even the darkest descent into a path of light. The ultimate purpose of spiritual consciousness is to facilitate the living entity's return to their eternal constitutional position as a loving servitor of the divine. By becoming fully absorbed without deviation, one can transcend all material contaminations and attain the supreme abode. This is the true escape from the abyss of demonic nature and the descent into darkness, leading to an eternal realm of peace and divine association. As we'll see in Chapter 3, this path extends to understanding the cosmic structure itself. Chapter 3: The Cosmos, Creation, and the Inverted Tree. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Bhagavad-gītā 15. 3-4. With the stage now set for this epic struggle between divine order and chaotic rebellion, between truth and illusion, as we saw in the demonic descent of Chapter 2, my mind naturally turned to the very arena where this cosmic conflict would play out, the universe itself. Milton dedicates significant portions of his epic to describing the creation of the world and the idyllic beauty of the Garden of Eden. As a yoga and meditation teacher, I frequently emphasize the profound interconnectedness of all living things, the cyclical nature of existence, and the concept of a divine plan, lessons that resonate in classes where students seek balance amid modern chaos like urban stress or digital overload. Reading Milton's meticulously crafted account of creation in Book 7, I was struck by its sheer grandeur and aesthetic beauty, with vivid imagery of stars forming and life emerging. Yet simultaneously, a subtle uneasiness stirred within me. Was this new world, this pristine paradise, truly eternal? Was it immune to the forces of chaos and corruption that lurked at its edges, much like how climate change threatens our own fragile ecosystems today? These questions, especially those concerning the fundamental nature of the material world, inevitably guided me back to my father and the inexhaustible wisdom of ancient Vedic understanding, where the universe is seen not as a static masterpiece but a dynamic illusion to transcend. This chapter will explore the cosmic architecture presented in Paradise Lost and compare it with the profound Vedic understanding of the material world. Our premise is to show how Milton's creation narrative, particularly his depiction of paradise itself, can be understood not as an ultimate eternal dwelling, but rather as a temporary inverted reflection of superior eternal spiritual reality. We will examine the Gita's powerful metaphor of the upside-down banyan tree to explain the transient, cyclical, and ultimately dissatisfying nature of material existence, a concept that parallels modern physics ideas of multiverses or quantum fluctuations. Through this lens, we will see that the ultimate spiritual goal is not to preserve an earthly paradise, but to transcend material entanglement entirely and return to the eternal spiritual realm, finding true peace beyond the illusions of time and space. Order from the vast abyss. In Paradise Lost, Milton masterfully portrays the creation of the universe as a direct response to Satan and his fallen angels' rebellion. After their expulsion, God declares his intention to create another world and a new race of men innumerable. This act of creation is not merely a display of power, but also a profound affirmation of divine omnipotence and a strategic move to restore balance disrupted by Satan's defiance, echoing themes of renewal after destruction. The void, the vast abyss that existed before creation, is described as a chaotic, unformed realm where chaos reigns supreme, a wild abyss, the womb of nature and perhaps her grave. From this formless primeval matter, God brings forth order, light, and life. The description is majestic, filled with grand imagery. "Let there be light," said God, and forthwith light ethereal, first of things, quintessence pure sprung from the deep, separating light from darkness, land from water, and the emergence of celestial bodies like stars and planets. Raphael the archangel is sent to Adam in Eden to recount the story of creation, emphasizing that God is the original creator and author and end of all things. He teaches Adam that humanity's ultimate purpose is to adore and worship God supreme, who made him chief of all his works. This narrative establishes a clear hierarchy and purpose for creation. Everything is subordinate to God, created by him and for his glory, much like how in contemporary science, the Big Bang Theory posits an origin point but leaves room for philosophical questions about why. Eden itself is depicted as a perfect, idyllic garden, a place of unblemished beauty and harmony, intended as the dwelling for Adam and Eve, who are granted free will within its bounds, with the singular prohibition against the tree of knowledge till then forbidden. It's a paradise of delicious vines and flowery hill, evoking images of sustainable utopias dreamed of in environmental movements today. However, even within this pristine description, Milton subtly weaves in hints of the material world's inherent vulnerability and transient nature. Raphael warns Adam that God attributes to place no sanctity, if none be thither brought by men who there frequent or therein dwell. This profound statement implies that the sacredness or perfection of paradise is not an intrinsic quality of the physical location alone, but fundamentally depends upon the spiritual purity, conduct, and devotion of its inhabitants, like how a beautiful national park loses its essence if visitors litter or exploit it. The very existence of chaos as a hostile wild abyss, lurking at the edges of the newly formed cosmos, suggests an ever-present external threat, while the tree of knowledge, standing at Eden's heart, represents an internal one. The material creation, no matter how divinely ordered, is not immune to external or internal forces of disruption, foreshadowing its ultimate impermanence, a theme that aligns with entropy in physics, where order inevitably decays. Divine plan versus accidental formation. Unlike philosophical systems that might propose a random or accidental universe, such as some interpretations of evolution or quantum randomness, Vedic cosmology asserts that the cosmic manifestation is precisely structured and under the superior guidance of the divine. The Supreme is the ultimate architect and controller. The creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the complete cosmic manifestation are conducted by divine will. Therefore, to suggest that the universe operates without a plan is considered foolish. The divine, as transcendental, is beyond the material modes of nature, meaning these modes, although issuing from the Supreme, do not affect the divine. This is a special characteristic of the Supreme. Although the universe is a product of divine energies, the Supreme remains aloof and unaffected, demonstrating inconceivable power and sovereignty, like a programmer who codes a simulation but isn't bound by its rules. 3 modes of material nature. The entire material world operates under the influence of 3 modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. These modes are emanations from the divine but bind living entities to temporary happiness, fruit of action, and delusion, respectively. The modes are constantly in competition for supremacy, with one often defeating the others, creating the diversity we see in personalities and societies. The mode of goodness. This mode conditions one to happiness and knowledge. Those in goodness are satisfied by their intellectual pursuits, developing real knowledge. They are purified by pious activities and are free from illusion. In this mode, people see things as they are, leading to a sober perspective and potential for peace and prosperity, like scientists or artists in flow states. Divine qualities such as fearlessness, purity, knowledge, charity, self-control, truthfulness, freedom from anger, compassion, and modesty manifest in this mode. Mode of passion. This mode conditions one to the fruits of action, characterized by great attachment, uncontrollable desire, hankering, and intense endeavor. Activities in this mode are simply miserable and, despite leading to temporary mental happiness, result in grief. Those in passion are greedy, with unlimited hankering for sense enjoyment, like entrepreneurs chasing endless growth, often at personal cost. Mode of ignorance. This mode covers knowledge, leading to madness, foolishness, and illusion. Whatever one does in this mode is neither good for oneself nor for anyone. Activities in ignorance result in present misery and can lead to lower forms of life in the future. People in ignorance are like animals, unable to see things clearly and become irresponsible, like addiction or apathy in society. These modes dictate the particular type of body and particular types of mental and biological activities of living entities. While these designations are temporary, by association with the modes, one acquires different types of mentality, like how diet or environment influences mood in yoga practice. Only by transcending these 3 modes can one truly advance in spiritual consciousness, rising above like a meditator observing thoughts without attachment. The upside-down banyan tree. The Gita introduces a profound metaphor to describe the material world: the upside-down banyan tree. This imagery is far from arbitrary. It is a complete philosophical system designed to elucidate the transient, illusory, and deeply entangling nature of material existence, while simultaneously pointing to the path of liberation, a metaphor that modern ecologists might compare to global food webs or neural networks. There is a banyan tree which has its roots upward and its branches downward, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. Roots above. My father explained this paradox during one of our garden walks, pointing to a real banyan. The tree's roots grow upward because they begin from where the primary creator is located, the topmost planet of this universe. The roots above fundamentally represent the supreme divine as the ultimate origin of everything. This material tree of illusion is generated by the divine and nourished by divine energy, yet the supreme remains transcendental to it, just as the roots of a natural banyan tree nourish the entire tree but remain hidden underground. Those who understand that the origin is the supreme are the knowers of the Vedas, wise ones who see beyond appearances. Branches below. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, my father continued, sketching in the dirt. These branches below represent the various planetary systems within the material universe. The lower parts are inhabited by varied manifestations of living entities such as human beings, animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, etc., while on the upper parts are higher forms of living entities, the demigods and many other higher species of life. This hierarchical structure of planetary systems, from the highest to the lowest, reflects the various destinations attainable by conditioned souls based on their actions and adherence to the modes of material nature, like career ladders or social strata in human society. Leaves. The leaves of this upside-down banyan tree are identified as the Vedic hymns. My father elucidated, the Vedic hymns meant for elevating oneself are called the leaves of this tree. If one can understand this indestructible tree of illusion, then one can get out of it. The Vedas contain many injunctions for beneficial activities, offering temporary material benefits and elevation to heavenly planets. However, if one misinterprets these injunctions or remains solely attached to them for material gain, like using self-help books only for wealth, they become entangled in the intricate network of action and reaction, preventing true liberation. Twigs. The tree's twigs are the objects of the senses. These sense objects, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell, are the allurements of the material world. Just as twigs are easily grasped and can lead one further into dense foliage, so too do sense objects attract the conditioned soul, drawing them deeper into the illusion of material enjoyment. The uncontrolled senses are like venomous serpents that constantly demand gratification, keeping the mind agitated and preventing spiritual progress, a common challenge in yoga, where distractions like phones pull focus. Roots below. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. These subsidiary roots, which spread throughout human society, represent the intricate web of action and reaction, actions performed with desires for results, and the accompanying attachments and aversions. As long as one engages in action for material fruits, these roots of attachment keep one firmly embedded in the banyan tree of material existence, leading to repeated births and deaths in various species and planetary systems, like karma in daily choices accumulating debt. Nourishment by the three modes. As a tree is nourished by water, so this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. The modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance continually sustain the banyan tree, dictating the experiences and destinations of conditioned souls residing on its branches. The varying proportions of these modes create the different species of life and the variegated manifestations observed in the material world, like biodiversity in ecosystems driven by environmental factors. Perverted reflection. Crucially, the Gita emphasizes that the real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. This indestructible tree of illusion is a reflection of the real tree of the spiritual world. Just as a reflection in water is temporary, inverted, and not the reality, so too is the material world. It appears real and captivating, but it is ultimately a perverted, temporary, suffering reflection of the eternal, blissful reality of the spiritual world, like a virtual reality simulation mirroring but distorting true existence. The reflection is situated on desire. the desire of the living entity to lord it over material nature and enjoy it independently of the divine. This desire creates the illusion that this temporary material world is a permanent dwelling, leading to suffering. The spiritual world, on the other hand, possesses the same variegatedness, but in reality, free from the illusion and suffering of its material reflection. Paradise as a temporary manifestation. Milton's paradise, though idyllic, shares intrinsic qualities with the Gita's concept of a temporary material manifestation. It is a world created, not eternal, and inherently vulnerable to contamination, like fragile biospheres on Earth. Vulnerability of earthly abodes. Raphael's warning to Adam, that God attributes to place no sanctity if none be thither brought by men who there frequent or therein dwell, resonates deeply with Vedic understanding of material sanctity. No material place, however pristine or divinely ordained, possesses inherent eternal sacredness independent of the spiritual consciousness of its inhabitants. If the occupants of paradise lose their spiritual purity and consciousness, the place itself loses its sanctity, like sacred sites desecrated by tourism. In the Vedic context, even the highest material planets are subject to creation and annihilation and are therefore temporary. Pious activities in the mode of goodness can elevate one to these higher planets, where life is longer and sense enjoyment is greater, but even these destinations are ultimately miserable because they are not eternal. The divine beings who reside on these planets, along with their worshippers, will vanish with the annihilation of this material world. True sanctity and permanence are found only in the spiritual realm, where the Supreme eternally resides. Material world as a training ground. The Gita reveals a profound purpose behind material creation. It is a benevolent chance for conditioned souls to go back to the spiritual realm, back to home. This perspective reframes the material world not as a place of ultimate damnation, but as a temporary training ground, a school where living entities can learn to rectify their desire for independent enjoyment and revive their eternal loving relationship with the divine, like life's challenges building character. Just as great souls need instruction to understand their true duty and transcend material bewilderment, so too are all conditioned souls given the opportunity to learn and return to their constitutional position. The entire Gita directs us toward this conclusion, that every living entity is the eternal servitor of the divine and consequently one has to act in spiritual consciousness. Cutting down the tree, the weapon of detachment. The Gita, having depicted the entangled nature of the material world as an upside-down banyan tree, provides clear instruction for liberation, but with determination one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. This is the central imperative for anyone aspiring to genuine spiritual freedom, a call to action that echoes in yoga retreats where detachment is practiced through minimalism. The imperative to cut. What does it mean to cut down this tree? I remember asking my father, pondering the seemingly drastic nature of the instruction as we sat under a real banyan. He clarified, it means to sever our illusory attachments to it. The Gita explains that one cannot become detached from material attraction simply by dressing in renunciate clothing or retreating to a secluded place if the mind is still restless, like trying meditation apps without commitment. True detachment comes from cultivating spiritual consciousness, from fixing the mind on the Supreme. The tree of this material world has no end for those attached to it, hence, there is no possibility of liberation for such individuals. The act of cutting down this deeply rooted tree implies a decisive and resolute break from the consciousness that binds one to material existence. It requires profound understanding that this world is temporary and that true happiness lies beyond its flickering pleasures, like decluttering a hoarded home. The meaning of detachment. Detachment is not about ceasing all activity but about changing the consciousness with which activities are performed. It means being free from the association of the modes of material nature. It is a state where the mind is detached from sense gratification and always thinking of doing good for others. It also means one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. The process of cutting down the tree of material illusion is a process of purifying one's consciousness and detaching the mind from sense enjoyment. To attain the supreme perfectional stage, one must cultivate purified intelligence, control the mind with determination, give up the objects of sense gratification, and abandon desire and hatred. Such a person must be free from false ego, strength, pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, and thus freed from all proprietorship, peaceful and competent for self-realization, qualities practiced in yoga through asanas that build mental resilience. The path of spiritual consciousness. The Gita provides the most effective means to cultivate this detachment, spiritual consciousness. This direct approach ensures that one's mind, though still in a material body, remains fixed on spiritual reality, like mindfulness in therapy. Association with devotees. My father emphasized that to cut down this tree, one has to associate with devotees, those who are in spiritual consciousness. This is how one learns how to discharge devotional service. Hearing the Gita in the association of devotees is particularly potent, leading one's life to be glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. Practical for joining online sanghas. Sense control and mind regulation. The Gita outlines various methods for sense control as a stepping stone to spiritual consciousness. This involves controlling the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and touch, preventing them from engaging in self-gratification, like digital detoxes. The mind, as the center of all the activities of the senses and the reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, must be controlled. If untrained, the mind can be an enemy, always agitated and oscillating. Gradually, step by step, with full conviction, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence, and thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Devotional service as the direct method. While other spiritual systems are discussed, devotional service is presented as the supreme and most direct path to liberation. It is considered the easiest process of executing spiritual principles and the highest perfectional stage of the spiritual system. Devotional service involves 9 forms, of which hearing about the divine is the first and most important, including chanting, remembering, serving, etc. The work in spiritual consciousness. All work should be performed for the divine rather than for personal sense gratification. One should practice remembering the divine while struggling for existence. This means engaging one's bodily and mental activities in the service of spiritual consciousness. Even those who cannot directly practice devotional service can help in the propagation of spiritual consciousness by offering land, capital, organization, and labor for activities like building temples or helping with publications. Such work, when performed for divine satisfaction, becomes spiritual activity, like corporate social responsibility with spiritual intent. Conclusion: transcending the material for the spiritual realm. This exploration of Milton's creation narrative through the lens of the Gita fundamentally reframes its meaning and purpose. Milton's noble ambition to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men finds its most comprehensive explanation not within the confines of a temporary, albeit beautiful, earthly paradise, but within the eternal wisdom of the Gita. The Vedic texts reveal that divine ways are not arbitrary or punitive, but perfectly just, guided by a benevolent plan to allow living entities to exercise their minute independence and ultimately return to their eternal constitutional position, a plan that offers hope in an uncertain world. Concept of the material world as an upside-down banyan tree explains why any earthly paradise, no matter how perfect its initial state, is inherently temporary and vulnerable to corruption. It is an inverted reflection, rooted in desire and nourished by the transient modes of material nature, like digital worlds that mimic but distort reality. The ultimate goal, therefore, is not to cling to such a fleeting realm, but to courageously cut down this tree of material entanglement with the weapon of detachment. This detachment is not passive withdrawal but active engagement in spiritual consciousness, cultivating divine qualities, controlling the senses and mind, and performing all actions for the satisfaction of the divine. Path of devotional service, with its emphasis on hearing, chanting, and serving under authorized guidance, is presented as the most direct and accessible means to achieve this liberation, tools anyone can use today. The true paradise is not a garden on earth, but the eternal spiritual world, the supreme abode from which one, having once gone, never returns. This ultimate destination is attained through the cultivation of pure devotional service, transcending all material modes and understanding one's eternal identity as a part of the Supreme. This is the highest perfectional stage where one is freed from all contaminations of the modes of material nature. This profound understanding is the true recovery of paradise, an internal, eternal sanctuary of peace and uninterrupted bliss, realized through unwavering devotion to the Supreme Divine. As we'll discover in Chapter 4, this transcendence is tested through temptation and the enemies within. Chapter 4, The Delusion of Desire. Therefore, O best of warriors, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sinlust by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Bhagavad-gītā 3:41. Cosmic stage was meticulously set. In our preceding chapters, we explored God's absolute authority and uncovered the spiritual error that underpinned Satan's rebellion, revealing how his consuming pride and corrosive envy twisted him into the embodiment of demonic nature in Chapter 2. We then examined the material universe itself in Chapter 3, interpreting Milton's magnificent paradise not as an ultimate, eternal dwelling, but rather as a beautiful yet inherently temporary, inverted reflection of a superior spiritual reality, a transient realm perpetually vulnerable to the forces of attachment and loss, much like our own fleeting digital worlds of curated perfection on social media. Now, the grand narrative of Paradise Lost converges on its most poignant and universally relatable moment, the temptation and fall of Adam and Eve. This is the critical juncture where profound theological concepts translate into the intimate, tragic reality of human choice, a story that echoes in modern relationships strained by desire or infidelity. For me, as a yoga and meditation teacher, grasping the fundamental reasons why Adam and Eve succumbed to temptation was paramount. It was not enough to merely comprehend the sequence of events. I felt an urgent need to unravel the spiritual mechanics that underpinned their fateful decision. How could beings, created in pristine perfection and placed within unblemished harmony, make such a devastating error? This deeply human and timeless question, about the very essence of choice, the nature of desire, and the veiling of pure consciousness, led me to another illuminating discussion with my father, seeking the clarity provided by ancient wisdom during a quiet evening meditation session. This chapter will analyze the temptation and tragic fall of Adam and Eve through the lens of the Gita's profound teachings. We will explore key concepts such as the nature of free will, the allure and dangers of sense gratification, the insidious power of lust, and how it covers pure consciousness. We will examine Satan's cunning strategies, Eve's initial susceptibility, and Adam's ultimate choice. By understanding their actions not merely as a historical event within a specific religious narrative, but as a universal lesson in the power of unregulated desire and the illusion of independent enjoyment, seen today in addictions to porn or power, we aim to uncover profound truths applicable to every soul's spiritual journey. The test of free will. Milton's Garden of Eden is depicted as a perfect, idyllic sanctuary where Adam and Eve enjoyed harmonious existence, devoid of pain, disease, or want. They were perfectly aligned with God's will, their every need provided, their days filled with innocent delight and purposeful labor tending the garden, delicious paradise. With many a rill watered the garden. Their communion with God was direct and unmarred, and they possessed pure consciousness, untainted by material contamination. Yet within this perfection there lay a singular, crucial test, God's command regarding the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They were free to eat from any other tree in the garden, but this one tree was strictly forbidden. Of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden God hath said, Ye shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. The nature of free will. This single prohibition, far from being an arbitrary restriction, was a constant reminder of Adam and Eve's free will. As the Gita explains, all living entities, though eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme, are endowed with minute independence. This independence is a divine gift, allowing for individual agency and the capacity for love which cannot exist under compulsion, like choosing a partner freely in a relationship. However, this minute independence also carries the weighty responsibility of choice. Adam and Eve were not pre-programmed automatons. They possessed the inherent spiritual capacity to choose between obedience and transgression, between loving submission to God's will and the desire for independent knowledge and enjoyment. My father often referenced the Gita's foundational statement about how divine wisdom was transmitted through a chain of qualified teachers. This chain of transmission implies that divine instruction is always available and paramount. Adam and Eve were given direct instruction, a clear boundary established by their Creator. To transgress this boundary was not a minor oversight but a profound spiritual transgression, an attempt to usurp God's prerogative to determine good and evil, to become, as Satan promised, as gods knowing good and evil. This reflects the living entity's deep-seated, albeit deluded, desire to lord it over material nature, a propensity that leads to entanglement, seen in modern pursuits of control through technology or status. Satan's cunning and the seduction of doubt. Satan, having been cast into hell and determined to wreak vengeance upon God by corrupting his new creation, meticulously devises a strategy rooted in subtle fraud and guile. He recognizes that direct confrontation against God's omnipotence is futile. Instead, he targets the nascent innocence of Adam and Eve, focusing on Eve first, understanding that the human mind, even in its purity, can be swayed by temptation if doubt is skillfully introduced, like hackers exploiting vulnerabilities in secure systems. Targeting Eve's intellect and subtle desire. Satan, entering the garden disguised as a serpent, approaches Eve with deceptive flattery and cunning arguments. He praises her beauty and wisdom, subtly appealing to her vanity and intellectual curiosity. Fairest resemblance of thy Maker fair, thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore. His fraudulent temptation thus began with a question designed to sow doubt about God's benevolence and his command regarding the forbidden tree. Ye shall not die, how should ye? By the fruit? It gives you life to knowledge. He speaks of the tree with enticing descriptions. This tree where grows this fruit, delicious to the taste and gay to sight, to wisdom gives, to knowledge and to might. Eve, initially startled by the serpent's ability to speak, is gradually swayed by his eloquence and his fabricated story of miraculous transformation and elevated knowledge gained from consuming the fruit. But say, where grows the tree? From hence how far? Her seemingly innocent question already betrays a burgeoning desire, an intellectual curiosity tinged with illicit longing. This subtle stirring of desire even before the act is what the Gita identifies as the incipient stages of lust, like scrolling social media, starting with curiosity but leading to envy. Poisoning the mind with falsehood. Satan, sensing his advantage, then directly attacks the credibility and benevolence of God's command. He assures her, "Ye shall not die. How should you? By the fruit? Gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener? Look on me, me who have touched and tasted, yet both live and speak and reason and discern and see." He not only contradicts God's warning but also subtly implies God's envy, suggesting that God prohibits the fruit because he knows thy day of consummation, when to me all gods shall fall in servitude and thou shalt reign with them. This is a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Direct contradiction of divine instruction. He plants the seed of doubt about God's truthfulness, like fake news eroding trust. Personal testimony. He offers himself as proof that the fruit is harmless and beneficial, appealing to empirical evidence. Appeal to higher ambition. He promises godlike knowledge and equality, tapping into the inherent desire for elevation but twisting it towards self-aggrandizement, like career advice promising godlike success through shortcuts. Accusation of divine jealousy. He suggests God is withholding something good out of selfishness, thus portraying God as less than perfect and benevolent. This strategy is characteristic of the demonic, who do not know the scriptural rules and devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims. Satan, as the artificer of fraud, acts as an unscrupulous commentator, twisting the divine word through his unauthorized and self-serving interpretations. He aims to mislead the public and general readers from the path of divine instructions. Such false philosophy and pleasing sorcery are designed to charm pain for a while or anguish and excite fallacious hope, luring the unsuspecting into deeper illusion, like scams promising quick riches. The insidious power of lust. The temptation of Eve and subsequently Adam is not merely a tale of a forbidden fruit, it is a profound illustration of the insidious power of lust as defined in the Gita. This is the central symbol of sin that, left unchecked, destroys knowledge and self-realization, a force seen in modern epidemics of addiction. Lust as the greatest sinful enemy. My father stressed that, here is the moment of spiritual reckoning for Eve during our discussion. Despite clear warnings and despite her inherently pure consciousness, she allowed herself to be deluded. Satan's cunning arguments appealed directly to her senses and her subtle yet burgeoning desire for increased knowledge and power. This is precisely where the Gita's teaching becomes profoundly relevant. It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Therefore, O best of warriors, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Lust is presented not merely as sexual desire, but as any insatiable desire for material gratification, including the lust for power, knowledge independent of God, fame, and control. It is a formidable enemy of the conditioned soul because it directly opposes pure consciousness and the soul's natural inclination towards divine service. This desire for overlording and sense gratification represents the greatest internal adversaries for the spirit soul trapped in material existence, like dopamine hits from likes or porn, leading to endless craving. Covering of pure consciousness. The Gita explains that lust covers the living entity's pure consciousness in varying degrees. This covering is likened to smoke in the fire. When pure consciousness is only slightly perceived, it is like fire covered by smoke. The fire is there, but its manifestation is obscured. This stage is akin to the beginning of spiritual consciousness in human beings, where the spark of spiritual life exists but is not fully blazing. Dust on the mirror. This refers to a cleansing process of the mind which is like a mirror reflecting pure consciousness. The accumulation of material desires and karmic reactions is like dust, obscuring the clear reflection. The Gita suggests that the best process is to chant the holy names to clean this mirror of the mind. The embryo covered by the womb. This analogy illustrates a state of extreme helplessness and lack of consciousness. The embryo cannot move independently. This stage can be compared to that of trees, which are living entities but are in such a condition of life, almost void of all consciousness, due to a great exhibition of lust. Satan's arguments preyed upon Eve's slightly covered consciousness, appealing to a dormant desire for independent knowledge and enjoyment. Her pure consciousness, though present, was vulnerable to subtle allurements, just as fire under smoke can be fanned into flames or extinguished, like subtle ads targeting vulnerabilities. Lust as internal enemy. The Gita identifies lust as an internal enemy residing within the senses, mind, and intelligence. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. This internal positioning makes lust particularly dangerous because it is not an external force but an inherent tendency that can be triggered by association with the modes of passion and ignorance. In the case of Eve, Satan's external temptation activated this internal lust. Her senses were engaged by the serpent's appearance and words, her mind was swayed by his arguments, and her intelligence was clouded by doubt and desire. This led to her decision to eat the fruit, which in turn influenced Adam, like chain reactions in relationships where one partner's doubt infects the other. Attachment or obedience. Adam's fall is particularly tragic because it stems not from direct temptation but from his deep attachment to Eve. Upon learning of her transgression, he chooses to join her in sin rather than remain obedient to God alone. Certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? This choice highlights the power of emotional attachment overriding spiritual duty, like codependent relationships sacrificing principles for love. The immediate consequences. The immediate aftermath of eating the fruit is a profound shift in consciousness. Adam and Eve experienced shame, guilt, and mutual blame. They sat them down to weep. High winds worse within began to rise. Their pure consciousness is now covered, leading to fragmented perception and suffering, like post-addiction regret. Regulating the senses. The Gita offers a practical solution. Curb lust by regulating the senses from the beginning. The senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Curbing at the beginning. My father explained that this is not merely a philosophical concept but a practical imperative for spiritual seekers. It means taking immediate and decisive action to redirect the senses from their natural inclination towards material gratification, like setting boundaries and habits before they escalate. Withdrawal of the senses and mind control. The Gita extensively details practices for mind and sense control, which includes restraints, observances, postures, breath control, withdrawal of the senses, concentration, meditation, and trance. Withdrawal of the senses is especially relevant here, as it signifies the deliberate withdrawal of the senses from their respective objects. For example, during meditation, one is instructed to keep the vision of the eyes between the two eyebrows and concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed lids. This prevents both falling asleep and being distracted by external sense objects. This process helps one become free from all kinds of fear and anger and ultimately feel the presence of the divine in the transcendental situation. While this detailed system is demanding, spiritual consciousness is presented as the easiest process of executing spiritual principles, as it directly engages the mind and senses in transcendental service, thereby controlling them more effectively, like therapy combining mindfulness with action. Engaging the senses in divine service. The most effective way to regulate the senses is not by artificial suppression, but by engaging them in transcendental activities, specifically in divine service. This is the essence of devotional service. As my father would illustrate during our practices, eyes should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of the divine. This redirects the visual sense from material allurements to divine beauty, like focusing on sacred art instead of ads. Ears should be engaged in hearing about the divine. This involves listening to transcendental sound vibrations, such as the chanting of holy names or narrations of divine pastimes and glories. Nose should be engaged in smelling the flowers offered to the divine. Tongue should be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to the divine, and in chanting holy names. Touch engaged in serving the divine through acts like cleaning sacred spaces. This systematic engagement of the senses in devotional service is the main and sole objective of the Gita. It is a proactive and positive method of control, transforming potentially binding activities into spiritually elevating ones, like turning hobbies into service. The centrality of the tongue. Among all the senses, the Gita highlights the tongue as the most important and uncontrollable sense. My father would explain that, if one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. Tongue has two primary functions, to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, its regulation is achieved through tasting sanctified food. By partaking only of food that has been offered to the divine, one purifies the tongue and gradually loses taste for forbidden or overly stimulating foods, like vegetarian diets and yoga. Chanting holy names. Engaging the tongue in chanting holy names purifies one externally and internally, making the mind austere and detached from sense gratification. This transcendental sound vibration cleanses the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Adam and Eve, by desiring and consuming the forbidden fruit, lost control of their senses, initiating with the illicit taste on their tongues. Had they rigorously controlled their tongues and other senses, they would have remained immune to Satan's temptation, like dietary discipline preventing binge eating. Gradual advancement. The Gita does not advocate for an abrupt or artificial renunciation of one's duties or social position. As my father always taught, without being fully in spiritual consciousness, no one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called spiritual practitioner artificially. Such abrupt adoption of renunciation without proper purification can be simply a disturbance to the social order, like quitting jobs impulsively for spiritual pursuits. Instead, the path emphasizes gradual development. It is better to be situated in one's position and to try to attain spiritual consciousness under superior training. This means performing one's prescribed duties in a spirit of devotion. Even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. This assures the sincere practitioner that their efforts, however small, are never in vain and offer immense spiritual protection, like incremental habit changes and self-improvement. Transcendental knowledge and self-realization. The story of the fall, though depicting dire consequences, ultimately points towards redemption. The Gita provides the comprehensive solution: transcendental knowledge and the cultivation of spiritual consciousness, a boat across the ocean of miseries. The boat of knowledge. My father reiterated, the immediate consequence of Adam and Eve's disobedience was a covering of their knowledge. But the Gita provides the solution: transcendental knowledge. As the text assures, even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. This powerful verse underscores the transformative power of genuine spiritual knowledge. Just as a boat allows one to safely navigate a vast and perilous ocean, transcendental knowledge enables the soul to traverse the tumultuous ocean of material existence, freeing it from the cycle of birth and death, which is full of miseries, like education liberating from ignorance. This knowledge is not mere academic learning, it is a realization that burns up all reactions to material activities. Theoretical and realized knowledge. The Gita makes a crucial distinction between theoretical knowledge and realized knowledge. Theoretical knowledge is the intellectual understanding of spiritual truths, such as the difference between body and soul. Realized knowledge, on the other hand, is the practical application and realization of that knowledge in one's life, leading to direct experience of the absolute truth, like knowing versus living a healthy lifestyle. This knowledge includes humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a genuine spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of sense objects, absence of false ego, perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, non-attachment to family, even-mindedness in pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to the divine, detachment from the general mass of people, acceptance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. Anything contrary to these qualities is considered ignorance. Spiritual consciousness as highest perfection. Ultimately, the Gita identifies spiritual consciousness as the highest perfection of life. This state involves being free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, cultivating an understanding that every living entity is the eternal servitor of the divine and that consequently one has to act in spiritual consciousness. It is the ultimate goal of all spiritual systems, where the mind is steadily concentrated upon the divine, leading to complete knowledge of the absolute truth, like peak experiences in meditation. One who takes directly to spiritual consciousness automatically understands the impersonal and localized aspects of the absolute truth in full, without needing to go through separate processes. In spiritual consciousness, one knows everything in full: the absolute truth, the living entities, material nature, and their manifestations. Hearing as first and most important. Path to spiritual consciousness begins with hearing. Now hear how, by practicing spiritual discipline in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. My father would emphasize, no one can be a greater authority than the Supreme, and therefore by hearing from the divine or a pure devotee one receives the greatest opportunity for progress in spiritual consciousness. This means learning either directly from the divine or from a pure devotee, never from a non-devotee upstart, puffed up with academic education. This process of hearing about the divine cleanses the heart of all inauspicious things. Regular hearing and service to devotees strengthen devotion and lead to a state where the modes of passion and ignorance diminish, and one becomes situated in goodness, leading to happiness and freedom from material desires, like podcasts or lectures building wisdom over time. Conclusion: overcoming delusion, reclaiming paradise. The temptation and fall of Adam and Eve in Paradise Lost serve as a timeless and profound allegory for the universal spiritual struggle against the insidious power of unregulated desire. Their tragic choice, driven by a subtle lust for forbidden knowledge and a deep-seated attachment, perfectly illustrates the Gita's teachings on lust as the greatest sinful enemy that covers knowledge and leads to spiritual degradation. Their descent into shame, blame, and a fragmented understanding of reality reflects the inevitable consequences of acting under the sway of material desires and rejecting divine authority, like modern falls from grace and scandals. However, the wisdom of the Gita offers not despair but a clear and compassionate pathway out of this delusion. It emphasizes that true freedom and peace are found not in succumbing to the allure of independent enjoyment, but in the disciplined regulation of the senses and the cultivation of spiritual consciousness. By actively engaging the senses in divine service, consciously curbing the pervasive influence of lust, and systematically purifying one's intelligence through transcendental knowledge, the conditioned soul can transcend the material modes of nature, like recovery programs combining therapy and community. The narrative of Adam and Eve's fall, when illuminated by the Gita, transforms into a powerful lesson in spiritual resilience and redemption. Demonstrates that the ultimate paradise is not merely a lost garden, but an internal state of being. Chapter 5: The Promise of a Paradise Within. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Bhagavad-gītā 14:26. As we near the conclusion of our exploration, it's a deep joy to share how my father's insights, illuminated by the timeless wisdom of the Gita, can enrich our understanding of Paradise Lost. In our preceding chapters, we delved into the essence of God's absolute authority in Chapter 1, discerning how Satan's consuming pride and corrosive envy twisted him into the embodiment of demonic nature in Chapter 2. We then broadened our perspective to examine the material universe itself in Chapter 3, interpreting Milton's magnificent paradise not as an ultimate eternal dwelling but rather as a beautiful yet inherently temporary inverted reflection of superior spiritual reality, a transient realm perpetually vulnerable to the forces of attachment and loss. In Chapter 4, we dissected the temptation and tragic fall of Adam and Eve, recognizing it as a universal lesson in the power of unregulated desire and the illusion of independent enjoyment, seen today in the grip of consumerism or digital addictions. Now, as the epic narrative unfolds towards its conclusion, we arrive at the critical juncture of consequences, the fall of man, and the redemptive paths that follow. This chapter will illuminate how Milton's depiction of divine justice, the inevitable experience of suffering, and the promise of a paradise within thee, happier far resonates powerfully with the Gita's teachings on spiritual law, liberation, and the supreme path of devotional service. We will focus on how these concepts offer not just a summary but an insightful analysis, drawing connections between Milton's epic and the profound philosophical framework of ancient wisdom, a framework that provides hope in an era of global uncertainties like pandemics or inequality. Divine justice and mercy. The immediate aftermath of Adam and Eve's transgression is a somber depiction of loss and the commencement of suffering. Their expulsion from Eden marks the beginning of a harsh new reality, characterized by toil, pain, and mortality. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. This is not arbitrary punishment by a vengeful God, but the unfolding of a universal law of action and reaction. Milton, in his endeavor to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men, implicitly aligns with the understanding that consequences of each action are an intrinsic part of the cosmic design, intended to guide the conditioned soul towards ultimate realization, like restorative justice systems today that aim for rehabilitation over mere retribution. Consequences of actions. In Milton's narrative, Adam and Eve's suffering, their loss of innocence, the shame, the arduous labor, the pain of childbirth, and the inevitability of death, are direct results of their disobedience. High winds worse within began to rise, high passions, anger, hate. This mirrors the universal principle where every action, whether virtuous or sinful, generates a corresponding reaction that must be experienced. The Gita clearly explains that living entities in the material world are bound by their actions. The temporary body one obtains is the cause of varieties of activities and their resultant reactions. Living in this conditional atmosphere, one suffers the results of the activities of the body by identifying with the body. This ignorance, accumulated from time immemorial, is the root cause of bodily suffering and distress. My father often spoke of how this suffering, though painful, is not inherently evil or punitive in a final sense during one of our reflective evenings. Son, he said, gazing at the stars, think of suffering like a tough teacher. It corrects, not crushes. In today's world where people chase quick fixes through therapy or apps, the Gita reminds us it's a corrective mechanism designed by divine mercy. The material world, with all its inherent miseries, is ultimately a chance for conditioned souls to go back to the spiritual realm, back to home. The experiences of happiness and distress, loss and gain, are all temporary appearances that one must learn to tolerate while executing one's duties. This understanding transforms suffering from a senseless ordeal into a profound educational opportunity, prompting the soul to seek a higher eternal reality beyond the temporary material realm, like adversity building resilience in athletes or leaders. The complexities of action. The Gita goes beyond a simple understanding of good and bad actions, delving into sophisticated distinctions between different types of action. Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all sins. This verse highlights the profound complexity of actions in the material world and the necessity of receiving knowledge from an authorized source to navigate them properly, like ethical dilemmas in AI or business requiring expert guidance. Prescribed action. These are actions performed according to spiritual principles. They are meant for purification and for maintaining social and cosmic order. The Vedic injunctions prescribe rituals and practices that, when properly performed, can elevate one to higher states of consciousness, leading to material prosperity and a higher standard of life. However, even these pious actions are ultimately binding if performed with attachment to their fruitive results. The true purpose of studying spiritual texts and performing prescribed duties is to understand the divine as the primeval cause of everything and one's eternal relationship with the Supreme. Without this understanding, even pious action can keep one entangled in the cycle of birth and death, like volunteering for recognition rather than service. Forbidden action. These are unauthorized actions, those performed against the principles of spiritual injunctions. Such action leads to further entanglement, suffering, and degradation. Satan's entire scheme to corrupt humanity, tempting Eve with falsehood and guile, is a prime example of forbidden action. Actions performed in complete defiance of God's clear command. Such actions are neither good for the performer nor for others, often leading to present misery and potentially to degraded conditions in the future, like illegal shortcuts in business causing long-term harm. Action without reaction. This is the ultimate goal. This refers to actions performed in spiritual consciousness without attachment to their results for the satisfaction of the divine. Such actions do not generate binding reactions, thereby liberating one from the cycle of birth and death. My father would often use the analogy of a cashier. The cashier may count millions of dollars for his employer, but he does not claim a cent for himself. Similarly, one has to realize that nothing in the world belongs to any individual person but that everything belongs to the Supreme. That is the real purport of "unto me." When one acts with this consciousness, understanding that they are not the proprietor of anything, they become free from feverish mentality or lethargy. They are an example for modern activists who act selflessly for causes. Bewilderment and the need for guidance. The Gita emphasizes that even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. This is why receiving knowledge from an authorized source is crucial. Path to spiritual consciousness must be received through disciplic succession, beginning with the Supreme. Without following this chain of instruction, even the most intelligent individuals can be bewildered regarding the standard actions of spiritual consciousness, like experts confused by ethical eye without foundational principles. This also explains the danger of unscrupulous commentators. Such individuals, driven by personal ambition or a desire to distort truth, offer interpretations that are useless because they distort the true message. Understanding spiritual texts from an impersonal perspective will commit a great blunder, leading the misguided student to be bewildered on the path of spiritual guidance and unable to go back to the spiritual realm. Therefore, to overcome the bewildering complexities of action, one must learn from the divine directly or from a pure devotee, never from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education, like seeking mentors over influencers. Divine guidance and the path to redemption. Despite the tragic fall, Milton's narrative, like the Gita, ultimately points towards a path of redemption and divine mercy. God's plan is not simply to punish but to guide the erring soul back to Him, like counseling after a mistake. Michael's instruction to Adam. In Paradise Lost, after the fall, the Archangel Michael is sent to Adam not merely to pronounce judgment, but to instruct him, to impart knowledge of future events, and to teach him how to live in a fallen world. Add virtue, patience, temperance. Add love by name to come called charity. Michael's instruction to Adam includes lessons on developing true patience and rising above the bitter change of fierce extremes, the dualities of prosperous or adverse. This prophetic guidance is a crucial turning point, offering hope and a blueprint for navigating life outside of Eden, like life coaching post-trauma. This echoes the Gita's teaching on the necessity of tolerating non-permanent appearances and disappearances of happiness and distress. Text advises to rise above these modes. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. This state of equilibrium, of even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, is a hallmark of transcendental knowledge. It is a realization that all material conditions, whether perceived as good or bad, are temporary and ultimately irrelevant to the eternal spiritual existence of the soul, like Stoicism in psychology. Penance and submission. Following Michael's instructions, Adam and Eve eventually reach a state of genuine repentance. Milton describes them standing in lowliest plight repentant, with Eve expressing meek submission. This act of humble submission and sincere repentance is the initial step towards spiritual reconciliation and divine grace. Signifies a turning away from the false ego and an acknowledgement of God's supreme authority, like apologies in therapy healing rifts. The Gita presents surrender to God as the most confidential part of knowledge. The ultimate instruction is to abandon all varieties of dharma and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. This surrender is not a sign of weakness but of ultimate intelligence and a recognition of one's eternal position as a subordinate part of the divine. It is through this act of sincere surrender that one can become free from all sinful reactions and begin the journey back to the spiritual realm. Qualities such as humility and pridelessness are described as components of true knowledge, prerequisites for advancing on the spiritual path. To think oneself God is the most puffed-up delusion arising from ignorance which needs to be overcome by humility, like ego checks in leadership training. God's benevolent plan. The expulsion from Eden, though seemingly a harsh judgment, is part of God's overarching benevolent plan. The material world, with all its inherent difficulties, is presented in the Vedic tradition as a chance for conditioned souls to go back to the spiritual realm, back to home. It is not merely a prison but a school, an opportunity for purification and spiritual awakening, like boot camps building character. The divine is revealed as the well-wisher of all living entities. Divine arrangements, even those that bring suffering, are ultimately for the benefit of the conditioned soul, guiding them towards their eternal liberation. The Supreme is not partial towards anyone. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in an effort to control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. Thus, the suffering and challenges in the material world are opportunities for self-correction and spiritual growth, provided by a compassionate divine who desires the ultimate welfare of all souls, like tough love from parents. The Supreme Path. Culmination of the Gita's teachings and the ultimate path to genuine redemption and liberation is pure devotional service. This is the highest spiritual science deemed most confidential by the divine, a practice accessible in the digital age through apps or communities. The Gita consistently emphasizes that the knowledge being imparted is not ordinary but deeply confidential. In the 9th chapter it states, "This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed." Later, in the 18th chapter, "Thus I have explained to you the most confidential of all knowledge. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do." This most confidential part of this knowledge is the instruction to just surrender unto the Supreme. This profound wisdom, however, is not for everyone. It is specifically meant for the non-envious. The Gita's teaching should not be spoken to those who are envious of the divine. It is for those who are actually very dear to the Supreme, a pure devotee. This exclusivity underscores the sacredness and transformative power of this knowledge, which can only be properly received by a humble and devoted heart, free from the demonic quality of envy, like exclusive mentorships for the committed. Devotional service as direct liberation. The Gita clearly states that work in devotional service is better than dry mental speculation. It is easier, and being transcendental in nature, it frees one from reaction. Unlike philosophical speculation, which can be perplexing, devotional service directly elevates the soul. The guiding principle states, "One who is engaged in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me." This affirms that pure devotional service is the direct method for liberation. Spiritual consciousness, the full realization of the divine's supreme position, is considered the highest perfection of self-realization and the highest form of all spiritual practice. One who is in full spiritual realization has understood all aspects of the absolute truth. By taking directly to spiritual consciousness, one automatically knows about the impersonal and localized aspects of the absolute truth in full without needing to go through separate arduous processes. It provides full and scientific knowledge of the divine, who is ultimate knowledge beyond any doubts, like integrated learning in education. Engaging in spiritual consciousness. Practical application of devotional service involves engaging all one's faculties in divine service. The Gita outlines 9 forms of devotional service, of which hearing about the divine is the first and most important. This means hearing from the Supreme directly or from a pure devotee. Chanting holy names. For the current age, where other rigorous spiritual practices are difficult to perform, the best means of spiritual realization is chanting the holy name. This process is extremely effective in purging the mind of all misgivings and cleaning the accumulated dust of past karma, accessible via apps like Insight Timer for guided chants. Association with devotees. To effectively cut down the banyan tree of material existence, one must associate with devotees, those who are in spiritual consciousness. This association is vital for learning how to discharge devotional service and for being delivered from delusion. Hearing spiritual texts in the association of devotees leads to one's life being glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. Like joining support groups or online forums. Working for the divine. Even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of devotional service, one can still attain spiritual perfection by working for the Supreme. This involves being sympathetic to the propagation of spiritual consciousness, helping with resources like land, capital, organization, and labor. Whether it's building temples or helping with publications, any activities, when performed for divine satisfaction instead of personal sense gratification, become a spiritual activity and help one rise to a higher state of love for God, like CSR in companies with ethical intent. Faith. Firm faith is the bedrock of spiritual advancement. One who executes his duties according to my injunctions and who follows this teaching faithfully, without envy, becomes free from the bondage of fruitive actions. Even if one is initially unable to execute such orders, but has firm faith without envying the divine, they become liberated from the bondage of the law of karma, like trusting a process in fitness journeys. True renunciation and the renounced order. Following the fall, Adam and Eve are forced into a life of renunciation, leaving their idyllic paradise behind. This external renunciation, imposed by divine decree, forces them to confront the impermanence of material attachments, like downsizing in midlife crises. Definitions and distinctions. The Gita clarifies the distinctions between different types of renunciation. Renounced order of life traditionally refers to the complete renunciation of all kinds of fruitive activities. Signifies giving up worldly engagements entirely, like monastic life. Renunciation of fruits refers to renunciation of the fruits of action. This is more about internal detachment from results, even while performing duties, like working without obsession over promotions. Text further clarifies specific actions that might be contentious, explaining that understanding what constitutes true renunciation or proper action often requires divine clarity and cannot be determined by personal opinion or incomplete knowledge. However, it recommends that acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance should never be abandoned. The importance of purification. The Gita explicitly warns against an artificial or premature renunciation. Without being fully in spiritual consciousness, no one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called spiritual practitioner artificially. Such an abrupt adoption of renunciation without genuine internal purification and spiritual consciousness can lead to simply a disturbance to the social order, like pseudo-spiritual influencers causing confusion. Traditional spiritual society is divided into 4 orders of life: student life, householder life, retired life, and renounced life. These are all meant to help people become perfect spiritual practitioners or transcendentalists. The ideal is gradual progression through self-control, study, and austerity. Students are meant to live a life of celibacy and engage in the study of spiritual literature, controlling their minds by abstaining from sense gratification. Austerity is essential for liberation. Without austerity, no human being can get liberation. This systematic progression allows for a gradual cleansing of the heart and mind, preparing one for genuine renunciation, like career stages building expertise. Performing prescribed duties. Instead of artificial renunciation, the Gita emphasizes performing one's prescribed duties with detachment. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. This principle highlights the importance of working according to one's innate nature and psychophysical condition, rather than imitating others, like staying in one's lane in professional growth. A person in spiritual consciousness performs their duties without attachment to results, for the satisfaction of the divine. This detached action transforms ordinary work into liberated action, freeing one from binding consequences. Even if one initially struggles to fully execute divine injunctions, firm faith and sincere effort without consideration of defeat and hopelessness will ensure progress towards pure spiritual consciousness and liberation from the bondage of the law of karma, incremental like habit-building apps. The power of transcendental knowledge. The fall plunged Adam and Eve into a state of ignorance and illusion, obscuring their pure consciousness. The ultimate antidote to this spiritual darkness, as emphasized throughout the Gita, is transcendental knowledge. This knowledge not only reveals the true nature of reality but also empowers the soul to transcend material entanglement, like education empowering marginalized communities. Knowledge is fire. My father would always powerfully quote, "As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities." This metaphor vividly illustrates the transformative power of spiritual knowledge. It is not mere intellectual understanding but realized knowledge, a profound insight that eradicates the binding consequences that keep the soul tethered to material suffering. This knowledge enables one to become liberated from all sins. This transcendental knowledge is peaceful, and when one attains it, one is no longer bewildered by the influence of ignorance. It involves the re-establishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the individual soul and the Supreme. It is by this knowledge that illusion is now dispelled. Distinction between body, soul, and supersoul. The foundation of transcendental knowledge lies in understanding the fundamental distinctions between matter and spirit. The text clarifies, "You should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its owner is called knowledge. That is my opinion." This verse introduces 3 key topics of study. The body, the field of activities comprising the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested state of the modes, 11 senses, 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, life symptoms, and convictions. The individual soul, the owner of the body. The living entity, though superior to matter, is fallible and becomes entangled by identifying with the body. The supersoul, the divine's plenary expansion, present in every field of activities in every body, as the superknower. The supersoul is infallible and uncontaminated by the modes of nature. Understanding these three categories, the divine, the living entity, and matter, constitutes true knowledge. The text emphasizes that those who claim the individual soul and the supersoul are one and the same, contradict the supreme. This knowledge, when understood through a genuine spiritual master, becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization, like foundational courses in university. Spiritual vision. Through the development of this transcendental knowledge, one transcends the illusion of identifying with the material body, which is rooted in false ego. This leads to the spiritual conception, the realization that one is not the material body but is actually a spiritual soul. It is a realization of unity in diversity, understanding that while living entities are distinct, everything ultimately emanates from and rests upon the divine. When one ceases to see identities based on external material bodies and instead perceives the singular spirit soul everywhere, this spiritual conception deepens, fostering humility and an understanding of one's subordination to the supreme. This clear spiritual vision helps one realize that the divine is the origin of everything in both the material and spiritual worlds. Such a realized soul becomes firmly fixed in the devotional service of the supreme, and can never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical commentaries or by fools, immune like vaccinated minds against misinformation. Liberation and spiritual consciousness. Milton's epic concludes with Michael's poignant prophecy to Adam, offering the promise of a paradise within thee, happier far. This is the ultimate spiritual resolution, aligning perfectly with the Gita's vision of liberation and the supreme fulfillment found in spiritual consciousness, a concept echoed in modern mindfulness practices. The internal paradise. Michael's promise to Adam that with faith, virtue, patience, temperance, add love by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest, then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shalt possess a paradise within thee, happier far, beautifully encapsulates the concept of an internal, spiritual sanctuary that transcends all external material conditions. This resonates deeply with the Gita's teaching that true peace and happiness are found within, independent of material circumstances. This internal paradise is achieved by rising above the material modes of nature and being transcendental to all of them. It means being free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety. The Gita describes happiness in the mode of goodness as that which in the beginning may be just like poison but at the end is just like nectar and which awakens one to self-realization. This signifies that initially the practice of spiritual disciplines might seem difficult or austere, but the ultimate result is profound and eternal satisfaction. By constant practice, one can gradually come to the end of all distress and experience genuine, lasting joy, like initial gym pains leading to fitness. Path to supreme perfection. The goal of spiritual consciousness is to attain the supreme perfectional stage by acting in a specific, divinely guided way. This perfection involves understanding one's true identity as an eternal servitor of the divine. Qualities that enable one to attain this state are outlined in the Gita. A purified intelligence, controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification and abandoning desire and hatred, living in solitary places, eating sparingly and controlling one's speech, body, and mind, constantly engaged in meditation and embracing true detachment, being free from false ego, strength, pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, coming free from proprietorship and peaceful. One who develops these qualities becomes competent for self-realization and attains the perfection of life. This state of pure existence is the ultimate antidote to the delusion of desire that caused the fall, like holistic wellness programs integrating mind, body, spirit. Ultimate destination. The ultimate goal of this spiritual journey, the true paradise regained, is to return back home, back to the spiritual realm. For the spiritually conscious person, there is no fear of returning to the material world, regardless of the circumstances of their death. Such a person is promoted to the supreme abode. This is the eternal spiritual sky, the divine's supreme abode, from which, having once gone, one never returns. Conclusion: the universal journey home. This exploration of Milton's creation narrative through the lens of the Gita fundamentally reframes its meaning and purpose. Milton's noble ambition to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men finds its most comprehensive explanation not within the confines of a temporary, albeit beautiful, earthly paradise, but within the eternal wisdom of ancient spiritual knowledge. The narrative of Paradise Lost, when viewed through this profound philosophical framework, transforms into a universal spiritual allegory. It reveals timeless truths about the soul's journey, the workings of spiritual law, the influence of illusion, and the ever-present divine mercy. The journey of Adam and Eve, from initial innocence to a fallen state, and then to the promise of an eternal paradise, mirrors every soul's journey from entanglement to freedom in spiritual consciousness, like heroes' journeys in modern stories. Michael's final promise of a paradise within thee, happier far, beautifully aligns with the core principles of devotional service. This paradise within is the state of internal peace and spiritual satisfaction that transcends all external material conditions, the ultimate recovery of our authentic spiritual nature and our eternal relationship with the divine. From Eden to Enlightenment. As we conclude this first part of Paradise Revealed, reflect on how Milton's epic, enriched by the Gita, invites us to reclaim our inner paradise today. In a world of distractions, may this journey inspire devotional practices, chanting, service, surrender that lead back home. For those seeking more, anticipate Volume 2, Exploring Paradise Regained Through Vedic Lenses.